It felt as though they had already won the Quidditch Cup. The party went on all day and well into the night. Fred and George Weasley disappeared for a couple of hours and returned with armfuls of bottles of butterbeer, pumpkin fizz, and several bags full of honeydew sweets. "How did you do that?" squealed Angelina Johnson as George started throwing peppermint toads into the crowd. "With a little help from Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs," Fred muttered in Harry's ear. Only one person wasn't joining in the festivities. Hermione, incredibly, was sitting in a corner attempting to read an enormous book entitled Home Life and Social Habits of British Muggles. Harry broke away from the table where Fred and George had started juggling butterbeer bottles and went over to her. "Did you even come to the match?" he asked her. "Of course I did," said Hermione in a strangely high-pitched voice, not looking up. "And I'm very glad we won, and I think you did really well, but I need to read this by Monday." "Come on, Hermione. Come and have some food," Harry said, looking over at Ron and wondering whether he was in a good enough mood to bury the hatchet. "I can't, Harry. I've still got 422 pages to read," said Hermione, now sounding slightly hysterical. "Anyway," she glanced over at Ron too, "he doesn't want me to join in." There was no arguing with this, as Ron chose that moment to say loudly, "If Scabbers hadn't just been eaten, he could have had some of those fudge flies. He used to really like them." Hermione burst into tears. Before Harry could say or do anything, she tucked the enormous book under her arm, and still sobbing, ran toward the staircase to the girls' dormitories and out of sight. "Can't you give her a break?" Harry asked Ron quietly. "No," said Ron flatly. "If she just acted like she was sorry, but she'll never admit she's wrong, Hermione. But she's still acting like Scabbers had gone on vacation or something." The Gryffindor party ended only when Professor McGonagall turned up in her tartan dressing gown and hairnet at 1 in the morning, to insist that they all go to bed. Harry and Ron climbed the stairs to their dormitory, still discussing the match. At last, exhausted, Harry climbed into bed, twitched the hangings of his 4-poster shut to block out a ray of moonlight, lay back, and felt himself almost instantly drifting off to sleep. He had a very strange dream. He was walking through a forest, his firebolt over his shoulder, following something silvery white. It was winding its way through the trees ahead, and he could only catch glimpses of it between the leaves. Anxious to catch up with it, he sped up, but as he moved faster, so did his quarry. Harry broke into a run, and ahead he heard hooves gathering speed. Now he was running flat out, and ahead he could hear galloping. Then he turned a corner into a clearing and... "Ah, no!" Harry woke as suddenly as though he had been hit in the face. Disoriented in the total darkness, he fumbled with his hangings. He could hear movements around him, and Seamus Finnegan's voice from the other side of the room. "What's going on?" Harry thought he heard the dormitory door slam. At last finding the divide in his curtains, he ripped them back, and at the same moment Dean Thomas lit his lamp. Ron was sitting up in bed, the hangings tore from one side and look of utmost terror on his face. "Black! Sirius Black! With a knife!" "What?" "Here! Just now! Slashed the curtains! Woke me up!" "You sure you weren't dreaming, Ron?" said Dean. "Look at the curtains, I tell you! He was here!" They all scrambled out of bed. Harry reached the dormitory door first, and they sprinted back down the staircase. Doors opened behind them, and sleepy voices called after them. "Who shouted? What are you doing?" The common room was lit with the glow of the dying fire, still littered with the debris from the party. It was deserted. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming, Ron? I'm telling you, I saw him!" "What's all the noise?" "Professor McGonagall told us to go to bed." A few of the girls had come down their staircase, pulling on dressing gowns and yawning. Boys, too, were reappearing. "Excellent! Are we carrying on?" said Fred Weasley brightly. "Everyone back upstairs," said Percy, hurrying into the common room and pinning his head boy badge to his pajamas as he spoke. "Pierce, Sirius Black," said Ron faintly, "in our dormitory, with a knife. Woke me up." The common room went very still. "Nonsense," said Percy, looking startled. "You had too much to eat. Ron, had a nightmare. I'm telling you. Now, really, enough's enough. Professor McGonagall was back. She slammed the portrait behind her as she entered the common room and stared furiously around. I am delighted that Gryffindor won the match, but this is getting ridiculous. Percy, I expected better of you. I certainly didn't authorize this, Professor, said Percy, puffing himself indignantly. I was just telling them all to get back to bed. My brother Ron here had a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Ron yelled. Professor, I woke up and Sirius Black was standing over me holding a knife. Professor McGonagall stared at him. Don't be ridiculous. Weasley, how could he possibly have gotten through the portrait hole? Ask him, said Ron, pointing a shaking finger at the back of Sir Cadogan's picture. Ask him if he saw. Glaring suspiciously at Ron, Professor McGonagall pushed the portrait back open and went outside. The whole common room listened with bated breath. Sir Cadogan, did you just let a man into Gryffindor Tower? Certainly, good lady, cried Sir Cadogan. There was a stunned silence, both inside and outside the common room. You did? Said Professor McGonagall. But the password. He had him, said Sir Cadogan proudly. Had the whole week's, my lady. Read him off a little piece of paper. Professor McGonagall pulled herself back through the portrait hole to face the stunned crowd. She was white as chalk. Which person? She said, her voice shaking. Which abysmally foolish person wrote down this week's passwords and left them lying around? There was utter silence, broken by the smallest of terrified squeaks. Neville Longbottom, trembling from head to fluffy slippered toes, raised his hand slowly into the air. Oh, that's the end of Chapter 13, Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. While the Crimson and Gold were celebrating their victory over Ravenclaw, looks like Sirius Black was preparing for a way to get to Harry. And poor Neville wrote down the passwords because he constantly forgot, and unfortunately he must have dropped the paper somewhere. Uh-oh. Okay. So, that's today's reading for you. And the next reading will be Chapter 14. And it is titled Snape's Grudge. I'll see you next time in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.